والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. So we begin our journey with mastering the adhkar. And what we mean by the adhkar is the tools that we're utilizing that we find in the Quran and the Sunnah, and in this case, tools that have been utilized with some consistency that allow us to keep a connection with Allah. And we're using the book Al-Ma'thurat. And Al-Ma'thurat is looking at those supplications and acts of remembrance that have been transmitted to us by way of Quran and Sunnah and have been utilized at specific times throughout the day, specifically in the morning and in the evening. And these tools by which we learn how to supplicate, in which we learn how to recall or be in the presence of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, the aim is that they leave an impact on us and they leave effects on us intellectually and spiritually. That's something that's extremely important to understand. We've had discussions, myself and other imams, specific Imam Wesley and Imam Daniel Hernandez, when it comes to those who come into Islam, especially when we come from other backgrounds like Christianity and so on and so forth. When we come into Islam, a lot of times there's certain things that we're learning with regard to practice, but we're left disconnected with regard to connecting to Allah. We just, we kind of out there. And that creates a vacuum, creates a serious vacuum in terms of how it is that we manage our lives on the spiritual level. And so the life of the heart is extremely important. In Aqidah is, simply put, the set of beliefs or the principles that we utilize, right, that govern the way we think about life, the world, who Allah is, ourselves, and so on and so forth. Aqidah has, excuse me? At Aqidah,
Sheikh, unmute yourself really quick, inshallah.
one of the definitions of Aqidah, we find it in Bukhari. Bukhari defined Aqidah as al-qawl wal-amal. Basically, our confession that we make that Allah is one, that we believe in the Prophet, simply put, and we act upon it. We act upon that belief by establishing the salah, by fasting Ramadan, by making dua, by recalling Allah, and so on and so forth. And so some others, like Imam Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani, rahmatullahi alayhi, he mentioned another dimension. And the dimension that he mentioned in Aqidah, he talked about it being confession, that we declare our belief. Like we declare it with our tongue what it is that we believe. We're declaring what's in our hearts. We're acting upon it with our limbs. In other words, we're acting upon it. It's not just a matter that is intellectual. It's not just in our minds. It's not just a matter of my belief only being in my heart, but I'm attempting to live a lifestyle which is aligned with Islam, with the values of Islam and the practices of Islam and the principles of Islam. And so he says that his action, he says that his confession with the tongue is, that we're certain with our hearts in it, that we act upon it with our limbs, and that our actions are governed by the right intention to please Allah, to come close to Allah. and everything is aligned with the prophetic model, with the Sunnah. So here he includes the heart. He includes the heart, and so part of giving life to the heart is this routine, not just the salah, but this routine of remembering Allah. And so that brings us to a very important point as an introductory remark. You know, we have to remember that the term dhikr, adhkar, or in this case, the prayers and the daily supplications are categorized under the adhkar. Adhkar is the plural of dhikr. Adhkar is the plural of the word dhikr. A lot of times when we mention the term dhikr, people begin to think that dhikr is sitting around with dhikr beads, and having a certain formula of recitation. But here, the word dhikr, we have to remember that it carries different senses, different meanings, right? And so the word dhikr, sometimes it has a general meaning, يعني تارة يطلق ويراد به معنى عام. That's what it's one of the things that's important to understand, that the word dhikr, sometimes when it's used, what's meant by it is something that's general. It's not necessarily a formula that people are using with dhikr bees on the side. And we have to get away from that understanding of what dhikr means, because it limits the Quranic understanding of dhikr. So dhikr in the Quran has, and the Sunnah has, a general meaning, and then at times it has a specific meaning, right? وَطَارَةً يَقْصُدْ بِهِ مَعْنًا خَاص. وَطَارَةً يَقْصُدْ بِهِ مَعْنًا أَخَص. And sometimes it means a more specific meaning, right? So in the general meaning, people of dhikr, in the general meaning, it encompasses that which we engage in to remember Allah with the tongue, that which is operating in the hearts, and that which we're acting with regard to engaging or acting out or enacting or practicing good deeds, the good deeds that are legislated by Islam in specific and in general. So dhikr can be the act of salah itself. Salah sometimes is called dhikr. It could be recitation of the Quran. Dhikr could be encouraging people to good. It could be being with my family and we're recalling or recollecting Allah. And I'm talking about by reminding each other what's good, encouraging each other about the hereafter. It's not necessarily just that we have a formula of dhikr. So that's something that we want to get into our minds. But part of dhikr also, which is important to understand, is that included in it is praising Allah, thana Allah. And part of it is a remembering Allah with regard to who Allah is, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah is neither male nor female. Allah is not a thing, not a creation. So we get to know Allah by two means in general. There's many means, but two means in general that we have to have as foundational. The sifat and the asma of Allah, the qualities and names of Allah, or the attributes and the names of Allah. And then we get to also know Allah by way of the creation. The creation points to who Allah is, and the Quran clarifies for us. And we'll get to that in a few minutes from the angle of one of the first things that we engage in as far as a means to remember Allah and to praise Allah and to call out to Allah, is Surah Al-Fatiha, which is the first thing which we encounter in the Al-Ma'thurat, is the foundational practice that we have, right? And so we'll talk a little bit about that. But I just wanted to get that point clear, that dhikr is not just a basic program. It can mean good deeds. It can mean what's going on in our hearts. It can mean what's going on with our tongue. It can mean the routine. It can mean the routine of the adhkar, or these supplications and points of recollecting Allah. Dhikr is a rich word, and it has multiple meanings. And we wanted to make sure that we also clarify briefly, without going into a lot of depth for the moment. As we move along, we'll cover other points. Can anyone tell me what is the difference between dhikr in the most specific sense, remembering Allah, and dua or supplication? What's the difference between the two? Does anybody know? What's the overlap? What's the difference?
Sheikh, you got a question from Sister Melanie, since she has her hand up.
Can you do? Well, sir.
I was thinking maybe dua is just coming from the heart. Dhikr is like specific sayings taught by the Prophet.
Okay. That's a beginning point. It works, but we have to give it some nuance, refine that a little bit so we can be more clear. But it's not necessarily wrong. Sheikh, can you read off what's being said? Sheikh Wesley?
I could read it for you, inshallah.
Okay, inshallah.
So, Asra, we would put, is that with dhikr, you are remembering and showing gratitude for Allah, but with dua and supplication, you are asking Allah for something.
Yes, yes, you're requesting, you're beseeching Allah, you're asking something. That's it. That's important. And so we have to pause for a moment. And yes, like, it should come from the heart, but it can come silently as well. Dhikr, there's reward when you're utilizing the heart, the tongue. It doesn't have to be out loud, but the issue of moving the tongue adds reward to it. Why? Because you're using part of the body versus just the dhikr of the heart. But the dhikr where you're silent and it's going on in your heart only. Some of the scholars, they debate on these nuances, but that's fine. You know what I'm saying? But there's something to keep in mind, that that as we're keeping our tongues wet with dhikr, and I'm not saying necessarily out loud so everyone can hear, but what we're doing is we're engaging in an action on top of including the heart. We're using the tongue, right? We're using the tongue. But dhikr, it could be with the tongue, it can be with the heart solely, it could be with the tongue, or it can be a combination of both, which that's what's most beneficial or virtuous, right? And that's something that shouldn't be left, you know what I'm saying, just because some people may hear you buzzing away, you know what I'm saying. That, of course, the intention is always for Allah, and that brings us to the point of sincerity, you know what I'm saying. Anything else? What other can you read off the rest of them, rest of the comments? Hello, can we read the rest of the comments? Anybody else, please?
I'll read them, Sheikh, inshallah.
Okay.
So, my comment was, in both cases, we're praising and asking Allah. Sister Maryam said, isn't dhikr a set amount of reciting specific dua or 99 names of Allah? Brother Jose Yusuf said, dua is a type of dhikr where when you're asking Allah for something, while dhikr is remembering and praising Allah, reading Quran.
Not just reading Quran, but remembering and praising Allah. You know, dua is a form of remembrance, but a key point, a key difference is that uh that we're asking, we're supplicating. We're not just, you know, we're not just in the mode of being in the presence of Allah, remembering Allah.
You muted again, Sheikh.
Remember,
Yeah.
we said that that we said that dua, the difference or al-farq between the dua wa dhikr, the key point is the difference between the two, dhikr and dua, is the issue of asking. So dua is considered one of the highest states of ibadah. Well, you know, I would want to ask so we can be engaged more, but I know that there's still some more questions. So I'll say it really brief, you know, unless somebody wants to respond and join in. I personally would like that somebody responds instead of, you know, me. Okay, we covered everything that was said. We covered everything that was said so far. Sumaya, she read everything that was said. It's not, you know, dhikr is not a set, just dhikr in the Quranic sense is not just a set formula that, you know, dhikr includes good actions. It includes remembering Allah with our hearts, with our tongues. We want to get out of this idea that dhikr is only some routine that a sheikh gives us or the recitation of the 99 names only. Dhikr includes good deeds. It includes enjoining the good and forbidding anything that calls us to remember Allah. But we have, and that's the general meaning of dhikr. But in the more specific sense, we have some things, some formulas that are given to us in the Quran and Sunnah. So then, the idea of reciting the names of Allah can be a form of dhikr. The idea of daily reciting the ma'surat, or engaging the prayers and supplications in the morning and the evening, that's a form of dhikr. Making istighfar, saying astaghfirullah, saying alhamdulillah, saying subhanallah, all that's a form of dhikr. But like we mentioned, people, dhikr has a general meaning and a specific meaning, right? So that's important. The Quran itself is called dhikr, and so that's key. But what is something that's said about dua? Dua is the highest form of what? Some people say, or dua is more specifically, dua is the heart of what? That's more close to the hadith. You know, we have a hadith which describes dua as what? Mukh or the heart of.
Huh? Was that a question? Sorry,
Yes.
I don't know if you were mentioned.
Yes, a question.
Question.
Dua
of the
is.
salah, Shaykh?
Huh?
Of the salah.
Dua is in salah. Salah is that what salah contains dua and dhikr. Dua, I mean, salah itself is such a perfect act of ibadah because it includes the heart, it includes the body, it includes the mind, it includes the tongue, more specifically part of the body, and then it contains within it dhikr. It contains within it praise of Allah, remembrance of Allah, supplication of Allah. That's why all the salah itself serves as like if you go ahead, go ahead. She fell off. We'll wait for her to come back. But dua, you know, dua also, if you want to have your dua, if you want to figure out how can I come close to Allah so Allah can hear my dua, we should if I come and I talk to you rudely, you're less likely to accept what I'm going to say or ask you than if I come to you with respect and etiquette. And it's the same or similar reality with Allah. So dua, if we want our dua to be accepted, or if we want to come close to Allah by way of our dua, you know, and if we want effectiveness in our dhikr, making it after salah especially, it has special benefit and power to it because salah itself is such a perfect act of worship that it prepares the way, the stages for us to be able to supplicate Allah on things that we want to do personally. Because it's not just, we're not, in Salah, we're not just going and asking Allah. We're praising Allah, we're remembering Allah, we're glorifying Allah, we're asking for forgiveness in Salah. We're showing humility in Salah. It's such a perfect act of ibadah. So when we engage that act of ibadah, then we ask after Salah, or sometimes within the Salah itself, like for instance in sujood, it's more likely for our dua to be answered, in a more effective way. We're having adab, or we're having respect, or we're approaching Allah with regard, and esteem. We're showing our relationship to Allah in that regard. Right? So the sister didn't come back. Did Vilma come back?
We have two more here, inshallah ta'ala. One says, Adhkar of evening and morning after prayers are scheduled. Du'as are different and varied when we choose to supplicate. Do we begin dua with glorification of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?
Yeah. So, yes, we'll talk about that a little bit as well. So, Vilma didn't come back. So, dua by hadith is defined as mukh al-ibadah, is the heart of worship, right? Dua is the heart of worship, because dua, like we mentioned already, dua, you're asking, we're putting ourselves in a situation where we're declaring our need before Allah. And Allah is the one that can fulfill our needs. Allah has no need. So dua itself exemplifies and models, it gives an example of what is our true relationship to Allah. And dua, and from the etiquette of dua is that we ask forgiveness, and that we glorify Allah. Then we ask, for what it is that we need. We're showing humility before Allah in that sense, right? That's one of the things that should be understood. Or we glorify Allah first, then we ask forgiveness, then we ask for what it is that we need. Those things are we have different models in that regard. But one of the best forms, or one of the best models of dua, is that we just don't go to the table like, Allah, I need this. We go to Allah, we praise Allah, Alhamdulillah, and then we come and we ask for forgiveness, astaghfirullah. This is just kind of simplifying the idea. But we praise, we ask for forgiveness, then we ask for our specific need, right? That's from the etiquettes of dua. We kind of see that in Surah Al-Fatiha. But before going to Surah Al-Fatiha, one of the things that we wanted to emphasize, we talked already about the difference between dua and dhikr. One of the things that we talked about is that how these are acts of worship, and acts of worship need intention, people. And so whether it's dhikr or whether it's dua, it's important to have an intention and understand what it is that we're aiming at. And so purity of intention is defined in different ways, right? Purity of intention is defined in different ways. And so one of the things is that we find that Imam Abu al-Qasim al-Qushayri, and this comes in Fiqh al-Dua by Sheikh Abdul Razak, and even Sheikh no, this one comes actually from Sheikh Abdul Razak. It doesn't come from Sheikh Mustafa al-Adawi. He singled out this definition, and that is that purity of intention, or when we're talking about ikhlas, is to single out Allah in the act of worship, right? And in other words, we're only worshiping Allah, and we're intending, right, to be obedient and to gain proximity or closeness to Allah. So we should have that goal when we're making azkar, or when we're making dhikr dua, that is for Allah, focused on being for Allah, not for anyone else, not to gain attention, not to look religious, is not for anyone else other than Allah. And the aim is for us to come close to Allah and worship, right? We want to gain proximity. We want to gain the favor. We want to get the pleasure of Allah, right? Another thing that's mentioned is that, it shouldn't be, like I already mentioned, it shouldn't be to acquire station with people or their praise, or it shouldn't be something that's not focused on coming close to Allah, right? Imam Abu Muhammad Sahel bin Abdullah Tustari, he said that, that our movement and our stillness in our private affairs, or what goes on in our hearts, or when people can't see us in our public, what's the meaning of ikhlas or sincerity? Is that our movement, our stillness in our private affairs and our public affairs are for Allah, right? And we're divorcing self-interest. This is hard here, but we're talking about purification of the heart here. Our self-interest or our desire or what we want to gain in the world is not is not what dominates our attention. So our presence, in dhikr and our presence in dua should be for Allah in that way. You know what I'm saying? Should be for Allah in that way. And then, so when we talk about sincerity, we talked about the issue of purity of intention. So sincerity, the lowest level of it, according to Imam al-Qushiri, it should be that we align in our personal life, our internal realities, and what we show to the people. What we show to the people. So intention, people, in this regard is extremely important, because what we're aiming at through dua and what we're aiming at through dhikr is proximity to Allah, right? Proximity to Allah. And so that reality of intention should be very clear. And, when we talk about the adhkar, we're talking about, yes, specifically these adhkar that we're talking about attempting to do good deeds. And so all of us, when we come across learning virtuous deeds, we should try to act upon them at least one time, so that we can be included upon the people that act virtuously. But we do it according to ability, people. Ittaqullah mastata'tum. Here, we do actions according to our ability. Which is the difference. When we call to stay away from the haram, we call to kind of just stay away from it in total. But when we're called to do good, it's according to capacity. And one of the examples the ulama they use is the example, for instance, salah. If you don't have the capacity to pray standing, then you pray sitting, and so on and so forth. In other words, we do what is within our ability. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't aim high, or that doesn't mean we shouldn't aim to fulfill the commands as they are commanded to be undertaken. But here we're gaining an insight that Allah tabarak wa ta'ala yuridu bikum al-yusr wa la yuridu bikum al-usr. Allah wants for us ease. It doesn't mean that we get lazy. It doesn't mean that we slide on our deen. It doesn't mean that we compromise. That's not what we're saying, but we're saying that we have to be honest with ourselves. That's where purity of intention and honesty with ourselves and sincerity, all of that comes in. And when we're doing what we're doing, we should do it for Allah. Before going briefly into Al-Fatiha, which is the first, which is the first act of worship that we encounter in the Ma'thurat. We're not going to be able to go through over everything, but we just want to go over some key things. If there's any questions that haven't been answered or addressed, or any comments that want to be made, let's take that now.
There is a few.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
Someone asked if when they're in sujood, can they make dua?
Yeah.
If they can make it out loud.
It's better to make it in kind of a whisper, right? In a whisper, not out loud, because in the time of sujood the salah has this form. We shouldn't violate the form of the salah, because the salah is an act of ibadah that is what we call tawqifi. Tawqifi, people, means that is given to us in a certain way. It's not something that we just like freely change, right? And so it's given to us in a certain way because it's the bridge, it's the means, is the form by which is legislated for us to worship Allah. And so the worship of Allah, how to get to Allah, we don't make that up primarily. You know what I'm saying? Like, yes, there's things that we can do in life, like we can do a good job, we can be good mothers, good fathers, and we intend to please Allah. And that's a form of worship. But the salah itself is something that's legislated for us and is given to us with detail. So we don't change the form of the salah. So, but in the sujood, يعني أقرب ما يكون العبد إلى ربه وهو ساجد. To that effect, the narration goes. And so, you know, the reality of the situation is that sujood is that in which we have close proximity to Allah, because we are showing in that action, prostration shows great humility before Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. You know what I'm saying? And so the sujood is a perfect time that we make dua. It could be in your own language. It doesn't have to be Arabic, but it should be in a whispering tone. You know, it could be where you hear yourself a little bit, but it shouldn't be so loud that other people are privy to exactly what you're saying with clarity. But remember that the salah has rules and guidelines, and one of those is that you don't, that you're not changing the form, and so to change that to being out loud, a matter that's done as out loud is not according to the form of the salah itself. I hope that clarifies.
There was another question. Someone said, isn't the Fatiha an example how we should make isn't Surah Fatiha?
You muted, sister.
Yeah, Surah Al-Fatiha, I got the question in general. Surah Al-Fatiha is Surah Al-Fatiha gives us the model for dua. It gives us the model for dua. It starts off with praise of Allah. It starts off with remembrance of Allah. If we include the Basmala to be part of Fatiha, which the majority of the scholars do. And so it begins with Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim and praise of Allah. The Maliki school, not to get into these technicalities, but to kind of give more form to the answer, is in the Maliki school, the Fatiha it can be said silently, but when it's recited out loud, when the Fatiha is recited in Salah, the Basmala is said silently, and then Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen is said out loud. You know, and there's some details to that I don't want to get into, but the point of emphasizing that is so that people know that has some basis, that there's some scholarship behind it. There's some hadith that talk about how the Fatiha was recited, and some recited it with the Basmala first, some recited it with with saying Alhamdulillah first. The Basmala is Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. But in general, to move away from the technicality, when we say Al-Fatiha, we're saying Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. We're beginning with praise of Allah. You know what I'm saying? So that is, how dua should begin. You know what I'm saying? And then we're remembering Allah. And in this case, when we say Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin, and then we're mentioning, our position to Allah. Iyyaka na'budu is you that we worship, is you that we depend upon. All of that is a declaration of our position to Allah. Before we do what? Before we ask, Ihdina Siratal Mustaqim, guide us to the straight path. Before we ask Allah, we're praising Allah. We're recalling who Allah is, our station before Allah and our need of Allah. And then we're asking Allah for a specific need. In this case, we're asking for guidance. So that should be the model of dua. Is that clear for everyone? Sometimes I know that we can, when we're talking, those of us who are doing the talking in these classes, we can be unclear. So I want everyone to give me let's do a share check, make sure that it's clear for everybody, the point.
You guys can give a thumbs up, inshallah, if it's clear for you, inshallah.
If we take anything away from anything tonight, that's an important point. But the fact that you have models how dua should be made. Because dua is something that a lot of us, we don't know how to make dua properly. You know what I'm saying? Dua people is extremely powerful. Extremely powerful. But we have to be careful how we're making dua. We should never make dua where we're asking Allah for things that are haram. We should never make dua where we're asking for harming people, harming ourselves. We should never curse, people with dua, that type of thing. We have to be careful how we're supplicating because dua is something extremely powerful.
You got a bunch of thumbs up, Sheikh. You're good.
Okay. So when we look at Al-Fatiha, the first thing, that we encounter, literally speaking, is we're recollecting who Allah is. It's a form of dhikr, in which we're reciting the name of Allah. In the name of Allah, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, right? And so Allah wa ta'ala is making clear who Allah is, right? With repetition. This is something that the sifat of Allah wa ta'ala is being Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim is repeated twice. And we in one surah, in this case, the Surah Al-Fatiha, or in the chapter of the opening, is repeated twice who Allah is. That Allah is the most merciful, the most compassionate, and there's different meanings that are given to this. That Allah is in general merciful and compassionate to all of the creation, and then specifically, to the believers. The believers have a special station with Allah. And so the Quran is using a descriptive of Allah, which goes to the extreme form and saying and making sure that you have an understanding that Allah is the most merciful without limit, right? The form of Arabic that's used here is to emphasize without limit, right? That's something that's key. And there's different ways of saying it, but there's different ways of understanding the two names of Allah. But one is that Ar-Rahman is a general, a general sense of mercy and compassion. You know what I'm saying? For all of the creation. Allah allows the sun to shine on believer and unbeliever, rain for believer and unbeliever, for the creation and for the creation that is represented in plant life and animal life and human beings. I'm seen and unseen. And then the idea of Rahim, is the relationship that Allah has with us as individuals. That's something that is extremely important as believers. That's one meaning. That's one meaning. And then when we look at Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, we're praising Allah. And one of the things that comes here that's very important to understand, and I mentioned this in other places or in other sessions if people were there or people have heard before, but Rabb is in a very important word. People get away from using the word Lord. Rabb, learn the meaning of it. The word Rabb, it not only means God, you know what I'm saying? It not only means that Allah is the creator, but it means also that Allah is the sustainer, and Allah guides the creation in His development and in His existence, right? And so the word Lord doesn't give you all of those meanings. The word Rabb is a very tender word in the sense that it gives you this idea you're being taken care of. It gives you this idea that you live in a world that's meaningful, that's purpose, that's structured, that's guided. Even if we go through hardships, even if we're going through situations where sometimes we don't understand, why we're getting caught up in life in a certain way, but ultimately, implicit in it is this idea that this is a purposeful world full of wisdom, and Allah doesn't just leave us alone. And one of the evidences of that, people, if we fall into some doubt or we fall into some times where it's kind of hard to recollect, is you have to ask yourself, do you tell your hair to grow Do you tell your nails to grow? Do you tell your body to digest its food? Do you tell your body to rejuvenate when when you're asleep? Do you tell your do you tell your body to walk? These are things that are automatic. When you engage in certain actions, they become automatic. Did you tell yourself to grow teeth or lose teeth? You go through stages which are guided. And so our very existence on a biological level is testimony to the fact that we're living in a meaningful, purposeful world. And we're in doubt, you know what I'm saying, about that reality. And so when we talk about Allah as being Rabb, Allah is God, the creator, neither male or female. Allah is not a human, right? We use the time, sometimes we say he, but we're not indicating sex. So Allah is neither male or female. And Allah here, one of the aspects of the word Rabb that's made very clear is that Allah is the creator, the sustainer, right? And everything returns back to Allah at the end. Allah gives life. And when we use Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, it's a descriptive of who Allah is. You know what I'm saying? We know that the word Rabb means the creator, the sustainer, the maintainer, the guide, to an aim and a purpose and so on and so forth. But and that has the right of worship. But when we look at Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, it's describing or it's telling us who Allah is. And when we talk about the term Maliki Yawmiddin, here we get different senses. We get different senses. And here is really showing us that true ownership comes back to Allah. True ownership comes back to Allah, and that Allah has the ultimate judgment of affairs. And on that day, Allah stands alone. We stand before Allah. Yawmuddin is the day of recollecting our deeds and the day where we're taken to account, right? And so Allah that day stands in all power and all glory. Let's not just say king, because king is not going to get the total meaning of everything. And we don't want to give, in this case, king godlike qualities or take limitations from human beings. We want to get this sense that everything belongs to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, right? In detail, and everything is submitted to the command of Allah, whether we like it or not, right? And so when we get to Iyyaka na'budu wa Iyyaka nasta'een, here we get the sense, we want to go back to Rabbul Alameen. We didn't talk about Al-Alameen, so we want to relate that part to this part. Here it says, Iyyaka na'budu wa Iyyaka nasta'een. And there's some nuance in the Arabic language that we can't get into with totality, but the form here, the way that the Arabic is used is that it's making sure that we're emphasizing that it is you, Allah. We're putting Allah first, and then we're saying you that we worship. So we're giving emphasis to Allah. We're giving attention. We're giving focus to who Allah is. It is you, Allah, that we worship, right? And here we is in the plural. It's you, Allah, that we depend upon. So Alameen, is a descriptive of us as human beings, but also it can encompass all of the creation. All of the creation is in worship of Allah. And that's why we say that when we talk about Islam has dimensions. And there's one dimension that we talk about that it relates to yani al-irada al-kawniyya, the will of Allah that we're obligated to accept, whether we like it or not, believer and unbeliever. And you see that governing the universe, governing the creation. I just gave examples of ourselves. And then there's the aspect of Islam, which is about us submitting our will, us aligning with revelation, with Quran and Sunnah, right? And so when we talk about the Alameen, you know what I'm saying? We're talking about both dimensions. We're talking about all of the creation, and we're talking about the human being, and we can say the jinn as well. But these two creatures, the human being and the jinn, we believe that they have free will. So they are beings that exist. We're beings, right? And along with the jinn that we exist, that we have to apply our will. We have to apply our will to obey Allah at the level of conforming to the command of Allah as is made clear or manifest in revelation. But as far as the creation is concerned, like our biology, and as far as the sun and the moon, all of that is in the state of Islam. It all points to worshiping Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. It all points to Allah. It's like the angels. There's no free will there. You know, that everything is just in submission to the will of Allah. But human beings specifically, you know, are odd beings in the sense that we in part submit to Allah, and then we have to in part conform or align ourselves with the will of Allah. Right. And we're held accountable for that. We're held accountable for that. And that's why they say that the human beings took the trust or the amana, or said like that in the Quran, that human beings, you know, took the trust. And the trust is that you know, the issue of having will, the issue of having choice. Choice is not absolute, but human beings are indeed creatures that are unique and one of the greatest creations of Allah. You know, I was watching a video that was sent to me, and the video was someone was reciting the Quran, and in the background there was a man surfing on the ocean, and these big waves are coming, and the Quran is being recited, and you see this guy on this surfboard, and just the guy is just like navigating on the waves like it's nothing, like, you know, it's majestic, but in reality, at any moment that person can be knocked over by the wave and just drown, you know. But at the same time, the human being, you know, look at how dynamic that is. Like, the human being is on the ocean. The ocean is so powerful, and just, you know, just surfing. The same thing. The human being is in the sky on airplanes. You know what I'm saying? The human being can do amazing things, but the human being is not God. The human being can destroy much of the earth, but the human being can be destroyed automatically by an earthquake or whatever. So it shows you how unique the human being is, and how the human being, we believe, is at the pinnacle of creation, but we're responsible. We can't just destroy all of the creation. And so that's something that's very important to understand when we think about the term alameen. It has those different meanings to it. It can mean all of the creation, it can mean the human being only, and it can mean the human being and the jinns. But definitely here, when we say iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in, it is you that we worship. It is you that we trust, that we depend upon, that we lean, you know, that we look to for help, that we look to for the aid. Here, the human community is demonstrating its relationship to Allah. You know, Quran describes the human being as the Khilafah of Allah, the steward of Allah, the vicegerent of Allah. We mentioned that the human being has a special place, males and females. And then when we said, when we ask for guidance, Surah Al-Fatiha is telling us what when we ask Allah, Surah Al-Fatiha is telling us what we should be asking for. And that is to be guided, because we can be misguided. We can be delusional. We can be rebellious. We can follow our desires. That's part of the nature of living in this existence. That human beings can go astray, that we can be destructive, you know, and we need help. We need aid. That's just the nature. We're not created to be self-sufficient. Drink something refreshing. Allah Ta'ala is self-sufficient. We're not self-sufficient. You know, although Allah has given us great abilities, we're dependent at the end of the day. And so the Quran is telling us what should we supplicate for? We're in great need of guidance. We're in great need of clarity. You know, we're in great need of the support of Allah. And so when we say Ihdina Sirat al-Mustaqim, that's what we're asking for. Sirat al-Ladina. So then the Sirat, we're asking for guidance to the clear way, to the straight way, to the upright way. And so then the Quran also is telling us there's paths on the earth. There's the path of those that gain the blessing of Allah, that gain goodness from Allah, right? They gain grace and favor of Allah. And then there's the path of those that gain the anger of Allah, in the path of those that they're just, completely astray, right? So the favor of Allah is that we're acting with guidance and knowledge and with the right intention. When we gain the anger of Allah, is that we're uh, conflicting in the sense that we have knowledge, but we're not acting upon it. And when we're going astray, is that we're acting in the world without knowledge. So guidance is that we're acting with knowledge with the right intention to please Allah, and by the means that Allah has legislated in the Quran. So there's some hadith that mention some other meanings of this. I don't want to get into that right now because it involves the people of the book and so on and so forth. But those are some of the general meanings. We want to apply that to ourselves, that we ourselves can be either, favored by Allah, and to maintain that favor, we have to continuously keep the dhikr of Allah, which is to act upon the deen and to show gratefulness. And the greatest way of showing gratefulness is that we discipline ourselves to conform to the will of Allah. And we ourselves can be those who incur the anger of Allah when we have characteristics of hypocrisy. When we don't act upon the knowledge, or we distort the meanings of the deen, or we change the deen, we ourselves can go astray when we decide that we're just going to make up our own path to Allah. Or we decide that we're going to live in the world, without conforming to the knowledge that's given to us, right? And we think that we're going to create a sense of life, a sense of meaning that's from ourselves, right? So one of the biggest things that we can take away is this idea that Allah takes care of us and guides us, is the creator, that we live in a meaningful existence, Rabbul Alameen, right? And one of the greatest things that we can take away from Al-Fatiha as well is that, that worship is a collective effort. We're in this together as a community of faith, but also that we're asking Allah for support and aid, right? Iyyaka na'budu, right? And that there is a path of life that has clarity to it. And we're always asking to be on it, even though it may not be clear to us mentally, but we're asking Allah to guide us on it. And we're seeking the knowledge to clarify for it. That's what the purpose, of deen is. So, with that, we're closed for the night. If there's any comments or questions, we can bring it in now, inshallah.
All right, so you have a few here, Sheikh, inshallah ta'ala. Bismillah. So one of the questions here said, I had heard that in sujood, one shouldn't recite dua that is found in the Quran, such as the dua of Adam alayhi salam or the dua of Yunus. So that in sujood, one shouldn't recite those Quranic duas. Is this
you can recite dua, any dua in sujood after you make the assigned dhikr. There's the dhikr that is assigned to that point, of that point in the salah. Subhana Rabbil Ala, Subhana Rabbil Ala, Subhana Rabbil Ala, at minimum one time, but the sunnah is 3 times. And then after that, you can make any dua you want in your own words, or Quranic dhikr, any dhikr. There's no clarity that there's a prohibition in that. There's not a lack of regard or lack of respect. You're using the speech of Allah to communicate with Allah in the best state. You know what I'm saying? Allah knows best in that regard.
What is the significance of blowing into your hands and wiping across your face when making dua? And maybe she's referring to the 3 quls.
Yeah, that the significance of that is that the Prophet showed us that as a way of seeking protecting, that we're blowing into our hands is like it's a very light spit, after we, are making Quranic, basically after we're taking refuge in Allah by way of the Quran, and then it's a way kind of like a protection. But the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam practiced that. I don't see that there's, with my limited understanding, that there's some secret meaning unless it's something that's clarified by the Prophet. And that there's some things that the Prophet did that are not understandable in detail, but we understand it in general. It's a way of taking refuge in Allah. That's the general meaning of that. But that's a prophetic practice, Now, someone may come and try to explain it with some detail from themselves, what we think it means this. But what's clear is that it's a general way of taking refuge with Allah. The other stuff is people's meaning that they attribute to it, in that regard. We have a means to take protection, to protect ourselves. We do believe that there's things like evil exists. We believe that there's the evil eye. We believe that there's the whisperings of the jinn, of human beings, of shaitan. There's the bad influence, but we don't believe that any of that is equal to the power of Allah. It exists. Those things exist so human beings can have freedom of choice. So human beings can be accountable. That's one of the things that we choose. You know what I'm saying? What to do and what not to do. And we wouldn't be able to choose what to do or what not to do if there's not courses of action. Is there anything else that's
yes, two more came in. I've heard that it is bid'ah, and the Prophet never did that in his dua after salah, unless done at nighttime, where he blew into his hands and wiped over his face and body for protection after reciting the 3 qurs. But doing it after salah is bid'ah. Is that correct? So I guess just in general, she's referring to, or they're referring to here, that this person, in terms of after making dua, has some of the madhab wipe over their face after dua.
Yeah, these issues is best to always stick to what is standard, and what I mean by standard is that which has the strongest proof. We have one approach to this, which says that basically certain things should be done exactly as the Prophet did it, and that's it. There's no wiggle room. And then we have another approach that says, well, if the Prophet did it, it's something that's legislated, it can be done. You have those two approaches to this. But the safe path that removes you from the controversy is that you stick with you stick with it. I'm not going to say 100% literally, you know what I'm saying, but you practice these things like, okay, there's a set practice of what was consistently done by the Prophet. And that, of course, that takes some education. We have to educate ourselves. Not too complicated, but that's something that we can, one of the things is that some of these things that we're reciting, these dua and these acts of remembrance, this is something that was within that time frame that was done pretty much consistently by the Prophet in the morning and the evening. And so when we do these types of things, we should try to keep to what the Prophet practiced, alayhi salatu wasalam, with regularity. Does that mean that there's no wiggle room? Well, we have a position that says there's some wiggle room. But what happens is that when everybody is doing, like, kind of just uses the wiggle room, then what happens is that what the Prophet actually practiced with regularity, we miss out on that, right? But that doesn't mean that it's bad if you do something like that every now and then after Salah. You may feel the need to it. You may feel that by this methodology, which we find some basis in it, is something that's comforting to the heart. But the debate really comes when you're doing it on a frequent basis and it becomes your way only and it replaces everything else. That's where now you start to have controversy amongst the scholars, and they start saying, oh, no, this is changing the religion. If you do it once every now and then, or for a little while, and you give it up, without intending to say, well, this is the prophetic practice of how he did his worship after the sunnah. If you're not saying that, there's no real issue. But again, we should get in the habit of practicing what the Prophet practiced with consistency, without being so rigid and saying that it can't be done. Because after all, that is a legit act of worship. The debate is when is the time for it and the frequency, and if it's something that you should commit to with regularity in a way that the Prophet didn't do. I hope that that's clear.
So the follow-up question, just to make it clear, inshallah ta'ala, when they see a person or a sheikh after salah make dua and wipe their face, should they call them a mubtadi', an innovator, or not?
No, you shouldn't call them a mubtadi', because after all, in Adab al-Mufrad that was compiled by Bukhari, even though the hadith is declared weak, but Imam al-Mu'mineen fil hadith, which is Imam al-Bukhari, he compiled a book that's called Adab al-Mufrad. Adab al-Mufrad. In that book, is translated into English, you're going to find a hadith that's there. It may not be the strongest hadith, but it's there. Bukhari chronicled it. Outside of his collection, is Sahih collection. So there's some basis for it. And we should be careful that we're calling people people of innovation and so on and so forth. You know what I'm saying? But those are hadith acting upon them. It has some basis to it, and we find other hadith for that practice as well. But that's kind of what's there. You have some basis for it. It's not the strongest. It's not a practice based on the strongest evidence, but it has some basis to it. It has some evidence.
Next question, Barakallahu feekum, Sheikh. If we want to make our own dua using Surah Al-Fatiha as a rubric structure,
right,
but using our own words, can you give us an example of how this is done?
One of the Allahu Alam, but one of the ways that we can say is that we praise Allah, we glorify Allah. Allah, you're great. Just saying it even in our own language. Allah, you're great. Subhanallah, Allah, you're perfect. You're beyond any imperfection. Allah, thank you for everything that you have done for me. And then, you can say, astaghfirullah, I seek forgiveness, Allah, for all of our sins, especially those sins which, they hurt my relationship with you. And then you go into, Allah, I really need your help. I need your help with my family life. Allah, please increase me in my wealth. I'm struggling here. And kind of you have that form of praise, of seeking forgiveness, and then asking for your need. You know what I'm saying? Being thankful as well. You have that day. Praise, thankfulness, seeking forgiveness, and then asking for your need. And it's good. Is people. When I first became Muslim, one of the things that I struggled with was this idea of we have to memorize these formulas. I was somewhat against that because I came from a very, I was a practicing Catholic. So I had my own spirituality. And it was hard for me to conform to this idea of, well, somebody's telling me how to speak to Allah, at least on this level. Everything feels controlled, that kind of thing. But then I started realizing, with more knowledge, with more understanding, there's something special about the prophetic, dua. It's not just the Prophet Muhammad, the dua of the prophets. We have to learn how to approach Allah. I'll give you an example. I always use this example on a regular basis because it's very scary. Some people start saying, I'm even scared to say it myself, but some people start saying, Allah give me patience. Allah give me patience. And then they don't realize they're inviting hardship into their lives. Because if you're asking Allah to give you patience, how are you going to gain patience? You know what I'm saying? And so in verses asking, Allah for strength, so we have to learn the power of dua. And so sometimes when we're just going at it, we're freestyling on our own, we may be saying the things that we shouldn't be saying in terms of hurting ourselves because we're not learning how to approach Allah. We're not learning how to master the dua. So that's why modeling ourselves after the prophetic dua, we start to learn the power of dua, the technology of dua, how to use it in different situations. And that's something that a lot of us, we don't get, because we're so busy debating on this point and that point in deen, but how to utilize the dua in our lives, that's something that we want to get at. Of course, here there's a formula that we're learning, but we also want to talk about these points as we go along. You know what I'm saying? And yes, it's like the martial arts on the spiritual level. It's a technology. You know what I'm saying? We have to learn. Like a lot of times we say, "Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un." We learn that. You know what I'm saying? And sometimes we learn that, and some people automatically associate with it. Well, if I lose something, I say, "Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un." From Allah we come, to Allah we return. And then, or some people learn, I say that when someone dies, inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. But we don't realize that the Quran tells us that, in the time of hardship and trial and tribulation, we should recite Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi rajiun. That indeed from Allah we come, and and indeed to Allah we return, so that we recognize the nature of life, that ultimately at the end of the day, Allah is in control of everything. And if we think about Allah as Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, and we think about Allah wanting good for us, then we recall in that time of hardship that we're relying on Allah, and Allah wants good for us, and Allah is in control of everything, and life and death is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when we learn these techniques, we learn how to navigate life, instead of just muddling through. And it's something that a lot of us as converts, we don't master. You know what I'm saying? Because it's not something that we're focusing on. We may learn it in a routine way, but we don't learn it in a way that is to our benefit, and so we can grow spiritually. That's what we want to do. We just don't want to learn the routine and just learn the meanings, but we also want to study, the process of the importance of dua, the times of dua, and how to navigate it. But we're not only just doing dua, we're also doing adhkar, right? We're remembering Allah. So with that we end. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanallah al-azim.
Sheikh, just inshallah ta'ala, based on what you mentioned regarding patience, so that people learn, again, as you're talking about, learning how to make dua, inshallah ta'ala. The dua where Allah teaches us in the Quran, don't be scared to ask for patience. رَبَّنَا أَفْرِغْ عَلَيْنَا صَبْرًا وَثَبِّتْ أَقْدَامَنَا وَانصُرْنَا عَلَى قَوْمِ الْكَافِرِينَ. So you ask for Allah, pour down upon me patience, but and along with that patience, that thabat and that thabut, inshallah ta'ala, to be firm and keep my feet firm, right? Inshallah ta'ala, upon this deen and Islam and everything else, and then give us victory over the disbelieving people, right? So this just is the dua, mashallah, made. One of the duas from the Rabbanas, inshallah ta'ala, in terms of patience, that mix of the two.
Yeah, and the dua of Yunus, not everyone agrees with some scholars, but Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, regardless of what you may think of him, he explained it. And, and I use it because it's a reference which is pretty expansive in the English language. The dua of Yunus is a dua which shows the navigating of situations which require patience. You know what I'm saying? And need, and how it is that we're going through affliction and deficiencies, and how to come out of that, and despair, and so on and so forth. And so that's just one dua which is expansive. It has so many meanings to it. So with that, people, we end. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Remember me in your dua, and inshallah, and please read over the ma'thurat. Read it, get familiar with it, inshallah, and there's going to be another opportunity to learn it in Arabic and so on and so forth. Okay, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.